So by the time summer hits, a lot of our favorite holes, offshore fisheries, wherever you like to fish on your local lake, have been hammered, they've been found, and the fish there have been educated. And getting bite goes from just pulling up and throwing a crankbait or a swim bait to all of a sudden you really got to work for it. And one of the best baits to work for them is a drop shot. And the best color worm always seems to be a pink drop shot worm. So probably one of the go-to baits during the summertime and into the early fall months is going to be a pink finesse worm. Pink, for some reason, absolutely hammers bass all summer long, but when you combine it with a finesse worm presentation, it is seemingly lights out. It will catch fish in the toughest of conditions and will catch some of the biggest fish in your lake because of this presentation. So today what I want to talk about is how I fish this bait, some of the different worms that I throw, how I rig it, and how you can catch more fish on it this summer. So in all my travels, I have traveled to some of the farthest reaches of the country fishing in various tournament circuits, whether it's Bassmaster Opens, Major League Fishing Invitationals, the Classic, and in all of those tournaments, one thing that remains the same is a drop shot absolutely hammers fish. It doesn't matter if I'm fishing the Tennessee River in March, if I'm fishing Florida in January, or if I'm fishing, Lake of the Ozarks out west in September. It doesn't matter. A drop shot always catches fish, and it's always one of the top 10 baits in a tournament circuit. It seems like it always has its place and it always does well. And especially right now. And the benefit of a drop shot is that everybody can throw it. It's one of those baits that I give it to my cousins when they come out in the boat with me, when they don't know what to throw. I give them this because I know they're going to get bites. I know the hookup is super, super awesome on it. Like if a fish eats it, all they have to do is reel into it and the fish basically hooks themselves. And the land ratio is really, really high. And so when you combine that with somebody who at a tournament level knows what they're doing, it's an extremely deadly bait because you can get on these groups of fish that have been super, super pressured, catch a ton of fish, and put them in the boat confidently without having to stress about anything. So all I'm doing to work this drop shot when I pitch it to these isolated targets, you can see I'm just doing light shakes with my rod, and right there one picked it up just like that. Oh, he come off. I got a garbage hook set because I was trying to show you guys, but when I cast that out, let's try to not catch a fish. All I'm gonna do is just lightly shake that rod because all I want that bait to do is be bouncing a little bit down there. And the crazy part is the more you work it up here, it like threefolds how much that bait moves down there, especially when you're rigging it how I'm rigging it, where I'm wacky rigging that worm. You got to think that it moves it so much more than you think it does, and so you really need to pay attention to that when you're working a drop shot, just because a lot of times I see guys overdo it when they're fishing a drop shot. They overwork that bait. A lot of times where I'm from, the best way to move it is to just drag that bait. And so sometimes you just got to think about, how much am I moving it? How are the fish reacting to it? And am I possibly moving it too much, or do I need to work it more? And so again, I'm just light shakes, and sometimes I even let it sit, because what that'll do is that worm will sink then I can pick it back up, shake it again, pick it back up. Right there's another bite, little bluegill, and then leave it sink on its own. Kind of get twofold the action out of that bait. So that's just something to think about when you're working a drop shot. So the first thing that I'll talk about is the worms that I like to throw on a drop shot rig. There's 3 basic worms that I really like to throw. The first is this Z-Man SMH worm. It's a great bait. The elasticity of it is super, super awesome, and it's my go-to starter bait because I know it can handle a ton of fish, and what it likes to do is it suspends and it floats. A lot of times it'll float like this, but as you pull it, it'll level out a little bit more, and I know the hookup ratio with this worm is going to be super, super awesome. But I know if I get bit on this bait, I know I'm not going to go through a lot of different worms. And so it's my go-to for that specific reason. So when you're watching a Z-Man SMH worm under the water, the way it floats kind of throws this worm off balance. But it's my go-to because if I can get those fish that are really, really eager to bite, I don't go through as many finesse worms. So when you look at this bait, you'll notice that it rides tail up and nose down, which if you have really, really finicky fish can kind of turn them off. So when fish get finicky, I tend to put this worm down. The next worm is probably a fan favorite of many of you guys out there, and that is the robo worm. It's just a 6-inch finesse worm, and the reason that I like this worm is because it gets bit in really, really tough conditions. Because you get a really, really natural fall, it has that salt content strip on the bottom, you can really get a lot better action out of this bait than you can a lot of the Z-Man baits that I really like to go to. Because this bait actually sinks, you can hold it in one place and really get a lot of action out of that bait. So when you watch a robo worm under the water, you just get a sense that it has so much more natural prospects to it. The way it falls, and right here I have it nose hooked, and you can see how it really darts and dances, but it has that super natural fall that I really, really like when fishing gets tough, or when I'm fishing around a lot of pressured areas, or even if I'm just working back through an area. And you'll see how when I snap that rod really quick, that bait really darts off, and you can get a lot of reaction strikes out of a finesse worm. And even then when you sit there and shake it, that whole body just quivers and you get all the different light reflecting off of it. It is probably one of the greatest finesse worms ever created by our one favorite Aaron Martin. So that's my go-to finesse worm. The other worm that I really like to throw is this Z-Man Long Shots. It's just a little bit finessier of a worm, super, super thin profile, and I get a lot of movement out of it. You can see literally just by holding the nose, the entire bait collapses over. And so that's a bait that I really like to use for spotted bass, smallmouth, or finicky largemouth, just because this bait is gonna get so much movement out of it. It's a really, really go-to bait for those fish that are really, really pressured. So the one thing that the Long Shots has going to it is it has a lot of the robo-like action to it with how much that body of the worm is actually going to move. The only downfall is it's still trying to float the entire time, which is why I Texas rig it with a bigger 1/0 worm hook, but I still like to use it because I can go through a lot less worms and catch more fish with it. So when it comes to fishing a drop shot worm, there's only a few different ways you can actually rig it with still being able to get bit and with still creating a different type of action. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through the different ways in underwater footage, and I'll talk to you about the positives and the negatives for each one, so that way you can see what benefits and what does not benefit you for the situations you guys are going to be running into. So the first way that you can rig a drop shot worm like this is going to be nose rig that you can see here. You've already seen this footage, but I kind of want to talk a little bit about why I nose rig it. I nose rig it because I get more action out of the worm, just as you can see it darting around. Every time I twitch that rod tip, that worm is darting in a different direction and always trying to do something different. It also changes how the worm falls too. And I like to do this when I'm fishing around open cover. You know, if I'm fishing rock or if I'm fishing something that is not going to get hung up on, because my hookup ratio is phenomenal with that open nose hook. It doesn't get as much action as a couple of the other rigs we're talking about, but it just gives it some very, very erratic reaction, and this is great for smallmouth. This is probably one of my favorite ways to rig a drop shot worm, and that is wacky rigged. And you can see you get the same great fall that you would on a wacky rigged Senko or something like that, but when you're sitting here twitching it with a drop shot, you can just hold that worm right in place and really tempt those fish. This is a great way to fish it around isolated pieces of cover, you know, fishing it around dock poles, fishing it around isolated boulders, fishing it around laydowns where you can see it. It just gets so much action out of that bait in such a unique fall that people never really think about rigging a worm like this. And you can see even when you dart that worm up, you can get that great undulation of that bait. And so that's why it's one of my absolute favorite ways to rig it. The hookup ratio on it is phenomenal because unlike when you nose rig it, when they eat this worm, your hook is in the middle of it. So when they do eat it, it's almost a guaranteed hookup every single time they eat it. And the cool part is you can change the fall rate with the size drop shot weight that you put on there. So if you put a really lightweight, like a 1/16 ounce, you can get some really, really cool falling bites because it's falling so slow, and it almost acts like a wacky rig would, just in a little bit deeper setting. You can also get some great reaction strikes by throwing really, really heavy drop shot weights on it, but this is an amazing way to rig a drop shot. So really the last way I want to talk about rigging it is the traditional Texas rig style. And you can see here I have a different worm for it. This is a Z-Man SMH worm. We've already kind of seen this footage, but this is one of my go-to ways to rig a drop shot worm just because of how weedless that it fishes. So if I'm fishing a drop shot around grass, if I'm fishing it around brush piles, this is going to be my workhorse of a rig just because it fishes the best through all different types of cover. And with that Trocar light wire finesse worm hook, if I get a bite on this, it's coming to the boat. With the way that hook sets up and the way it goes through that plastic, you just get great hookup ratios with it, and that's why it's one of my go-tos for this rig. So hopefully that kind of helps you guys understand how to fish a drop shot a little bit more and use it in a lot of different situations. You know, it's honestly one of the best rigs ever invented out there. It's the only bait that you can actually work the bait vertically with keeping it in place horizontally. So that's why it's super, super amazing. It's one of the best finesse rigs out there. But let's get into the Bible verse for today. So today what I want to talk about is I'm going to talk about Proverbs 16:3. And what that says is, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. And the reason that I bring that up is because as an angler who's following my dreams, I think everybody else has also been in that position where you're chasing what you think you want. You know, you're chasing what you want to do, you're chasing your worldly desires instead of doing what the Lord has called you to do. And the reason that I bass fish is because I feel like that's what the Lord has called me to do, and that's what I feel like I was put on this earth to do, to help reach more people. But that's not the same for everybody. So you need to figure out what the Lord is using you to do and what the Lord has called you to do. So if you like today's video, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button to follow on for more content. But God bless every single one of you guys, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.